A faint haze hung over the city like a grim veil, turning every street lamp glow into a disquieting halo. In the early hours of dusk, Dr. Lillian Porter emerged from her cramped laboratory absolutely exhausted. In her hand she carried a small notebook, its pages scribbled with frantic notes that made less sense the more she read them. Despite her best efforts, she had yet to find a cure for the amnesia plague that had seized the region. She knew all too well what would happen once night fell. People in the final stage of the illness would forget themselves, lose their moral compass, and become the unwitting perpetrators of horrifying acts. When morning arrived, they would recall nothing of the terror they had inflicted. They woke with no memory, haunted only by vague nightmares. The plague had struck 6 months ago, first showing up as an innocuous forgetfulness, like misplacing your keys twice in one day or forgetting where you parked. But soon, entire segments of people's memory vanished. They couldn't recall anniversaries or birthdays. Names of close friends slipped through their minds like grains of sand. Nobody paid it much attention. The doctors diagnosed it as stress, as the city had fallen on hard times. Unemployment was on the rise and climate anomalies plagued the region. The memory lapses were brushed aside, chalked up to anxiety. Then came the night Dr. Porter would never forget, the first murder that was linked to the plague. A seemingly kind man, Mr. Rowland, the local librarian known for impeccably typed card catalogs, had been found sobbing on the curb outside his home at dawn, his hands covered in blood. His wife lay inside, battered and lifeless. He told the police he had no idea how it had happened. Confusion etched itself across his face, and his eyes were red-rimmed with tears. Investigations uncovered the plague's cruel escalation. People with advanced cases committed unspeakable acts under night's cloak, then lost all memory. They would only discover hints of what they'd done upon witnessing chaotic aftermath in the morning. In those early days, Dr. Porter still felt hope. She believed they would find some new medication or therapy to keep the condition from spiraling. But the plague, as if alive, adapted to every attempt to treat it. Now, entire enclaves in the city lived segregated. Those with advanced stage amnesia were forced into quarantined zones at night, only let out at sunrise under guard. Families were torn apart in the name of safety. Neighborhood watch patrols roamed, though no one fully trusted anyone else. Every new moon, more horrifying incidents were reported in the local papers. The city tumbled down a slope of paranoia, and the night stretched on like scenes from a feverish nightmare. Dr. Porter's days blurred into an eternal cycle of research in her small lab, scribbling chemical formulas and testing them on cell cultures, always with the faint stench of antiseptic in the air. She spent nights walking the deserted streets, scanning for patterns that might shed light on the insidious disease. Her hair was perpetually pulled back, her once pristine white coat now wrinkled and stained. Above all, she worried about Philip. He was her only brother, the one who had always been there to lighten the mood. Philip had caught the plague a month ago. His slow drift from reality gnawed at Dr. Porter's mind. The vacant look in his eyes each morning told her that, deep inside, he knew he had done something. He was desperate to remember. She was desperate to help him. Each twilight, Philip submitted himself voluntarily to the quarantine zone, an industrial district, left half abandoned. A steel and concrete labyrinth of hollow structures and broken windows. Dr. Porter often crept around the edges. She heard the anguished howls echoing against rusted metal walls and saw the silhouettes weaving among the factory ruins. Some nights, convoys of armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Other nights, they left the infected to roam free, believing the area contained them well enough. Politicians found it easier to fence them in than to address the root of the disease. No one talked about why some nights were especially violent. Some said it was the wind that drove them crazed. Others claimed it was the alignment of the moon. The only certainty, come morning, the infected remembered nothing. Dr. Porter believed that memory, though buried, wasn't truly lost. It was blocked. There had to be a key to unlock it. She developed a serum that was meant to ease the afflicted into recalling their previous night's actions, hoping that if they could face what they had done, they might finally break the plague's hold. But the tests were inconclusive, and the city's new governing body was reluctant to allow wide-scale experiments. Time was ticking away, for each night brought fresh terrors. She resolved to try a more direct approach on someone who mattered to her. Philip. He agreed to take part in her experiment on a warm, humid evening. The quiet air felt electric. They sat in her cramped office with flickering fluorescent lights overhead. She watched his eyes closely as she brought out a syringe containing a pale yellow liquid. In that moment, she recalled childhood memories, how she once bandaged his scraped knee, and how he used to make shadow puppets on the walls to amuse her. She drew a breath. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Philip gave a slight nod. There was fear in his eyes, but also a faint glimmer of hope. The injection burned under his skin. At once, sweat beads formed on his brow. Dr. Porter guided him to a seat, asking him gentle questions, encouraging him to unearth the missing hours. For nearly 20 minutes he stared off at the wall. Then his jaw tightened, and he looked down at his own trembling hands. Swallowing hard, he began to recount a disjointed vision. Winding corridors, shrieks echoing in the darkness, faces contorted with terror. He spoke of dragging something too heavy to carry, of screams cut short. Suddenly he broke off mid-sentence, his eyes glazed over. His hand lashed out to grab Dr. Porter's wrist with such force that she yelped in pain. Then, just as abruptly, the tension dissipated, and he went limp, consciousness receding. Immediately, she recorded everything. His memory had cracked open a floodgate, but it was too much. She needed time to refine the serum before it overwhelmed the patient's mind. All the while, the city outside continued its nighttime war with itself. Entire neighborhoods slipped into a frenzied chaos. Each morning, local radio stations reported the grim finds: abandoned cars, shattered storefronts, bodies left in bizarre formations, as though arranged by some twisted artist. Dr. Porter began to see small, repetitive symbols etched on walls, in blood or paint, an odd spiral, a shape resembling a serpent's tail. Witnesses who'd managed to stay lucid at night told harrowing stories of chanting, of half-crazed groups branching off into cult-like gatherings. It was becoming clearer that the plague had forged a grotesque subculture after dark, as if it were shaping the city in its own vile image. Rumors spread. Some claimed the plague was the will of an ancient being, punishing humanity for its hubris. Others insisted it was unleashed by secret government labs. The official line, if anyone still bothered to check, accused foreign agents of bioterrorism. Dr. Porter had no time for rumors. She was determined to refine her serum. The question was how to keep the test subject stable once the memories broke through. The existence of these twisted nighttime rituals suggested that the plague was harnessing a part of the psyche steeped in primal urges. Could the plague be feeding on repressed emotions? The notion kept her awake at night even more than the howls from the quarantine districts. The night Dr. Porter chose a second test subject, an old colleague named Dr. Jean Kim. She sensed a greater darkness at work. Kim had been a brilliant geneticist who once taught her everything she knew about viruses and mutations. He'd contracted the plague early on, but quarantined himself in his private lab. By the time Dr. Porter found him, he was pale, scrawny, and nearly delirious from nights of rampaging, of which he had no recollection. The sun was setting by the time she convinced him to let her help. They locked themselves in a small storage room, fluorescent tubes flickering overhead. She administered the serum, her heart pounding a mile a minute. Kim's pupils dilated, and his lips trembled. He mumbled something about seeing vacant eyes in dark hallways, hearing a shrieking that didn't sound human. She stood beside him with a notepad, capturing every murmur. When Dr. Kim's voice fell silent, he broke into a sweat, veins pulsing along his temples. Then, in a low guttural tone, he said something that made Dr. Porter's blood run cold. "We belong to the night. We are its nameless keepers." He repeated it over and over, each time more frantic, like a chant. When she tried to calm him, he grabbed a metal stool and flung it across the tiny room, cracking the overhead lights. In the sudden darkness, his breathing became ragged and feral. Dr. Porter stumbled, a metal tray clattering at her feet. She fumbled for the door handle. With a burst of adrenaline, she fled into the corridor. Moments later, the overhead generator kicked in. casting flickering emergency lights down the passage. She peered back inside the room to see Dr. Kim writhing on the floor, fists clenched, oblivious to her presence. It took hours for him to stabilize. When the sun rose, he found himself curled in a corner, trembling with no memory of what had transpired. These episodes forced Dr. Porter to conclude that the plague was no mere virus, but something that calcified guilt, inhibiting conscious recall through an oppressive mental block. The resulting moral vacuum left the infected free to commit horrors at night, with no sense of responsibility by day. Reversing such a condition was excruciating if done too abruptly. She needed a gentler approach, something to let them face small fragments of memory at a time. But her resources were dwindling, and the city's leadership was growing dangerously authoritarian. Curfews were enforced at gunpoint. Scientists were threatened with detention if they couldn't produce immediate results. Distrust festered like a tumor. When a city official named Mortimer Wright showed up at Dr. Porter's lab under armed escort, it was late afternoon. He wore a crisp suit and carried an envelope stuffed with legislative papers. His request was straightforward and terrifying. "We need you to make that serum stronger. We plan to use it on the quarantined population en masse, break their minds, if need be. Anything to stop them from destroying the city." Dr. Porter's veins ran cold. She had intended her research to help guide the infected gently back to sanity, not shatter their minds with forced recollection. Reckless usage of a potent memory serum could plunge the city into a deeper madness than ever, possibly creating an army of traumatized individuals capable of even more desperate violence. She refused. Wright's eyes narrowed, his voice like steel. "You will deliver the updated serum in 4 days. That's an order from the Central Council." Then he turned on his heel and left, flanked by his armed men. Dr. Porter stood there for a full minute, anger pulsing through her. She silently vowed to fight back. Philip and others like him deserved a chance at genuine recovery, not a Trojan horse that might destroy their psyche. She couldn't let the Central Council turn her research into a weapon. That night, Dr. Porter went to the quarantine district to talk to Philip. The sky was a grim canvas of cloud and half-moon. Armed guards stood at the perimeter, letting her pass only after she showed them official credentials. Inside, the air felt thick and oppressive. The shapes of derelict factories loomed like giant skeletons. Torn chain-link fences squeaked in the wind. As she ventured deeper, she spotted small groups of afflicted individuals scattered around trash can fires, their eyes blank and distant. Others wandered alone, hugging the walls in the dark. Faded now and then, she heard frantic whispers or saw a flash of movement in the shadows. The plague had turned this district into a living nightmare. She finally found Philip huddled against a crumbling brick wall. He looked disheveled, his clothes torn. A faint bruise marred his forehead. Dr. Porter sank down next to him, put a gentle hand on his shoulder. He flinched before recognizing her. As they talked, the sudden gloom of twilight deepened. She explained the council's threat, her desire to protect him, her plan to refine the serum so it wouldn't drive people mad. Under the flickering light of a dying street lamp, he clutched her hand and whispered, "I don't want to forget anymore." It was the first time she'd heard him speak of the nights with such conviction. She felt tears prick her eyes. "I need more time," she told him. "Promise me you'll be careful tonight. Try to gather others who want to remember. If we can do this together, maybe we can break the plague's hold." Philip nodded, but she could see the hint of fear that every sunset brought. Already, his voice trembled. The transition at night was almost tangible, a kind of primal shift. She left him at the barricade, heading back to her lab, heart heavy with the knowledge that time was slipping away. 1 day later, as Dr. Porter worked on a revised, gentler version of the serum, an urgent transmission came through an old shortwave radio she kept on a windowsill. A frantic voice stuttered. "They're building bonfires in the quarantine zone. People chanting. It's not random. They coordinated it. I don't know who's pulling the strings, but there's a pattern, something to do with the old train yard. Please, if anyone can hear this." The transmission cut out. Alarmed, Dr. Porter quickly packed a kit of preliminary serums, grabbed a flashlight, and set out for the quarantined region again. She refused to stand by while more atrocities unfolded. This time, the guards at the perimeter were nowhere in sight. The chain-link gates had been torn open, twisted metal bending inwards as if something powerful had forced its way out. The industrial zone was eerily silent, bathed in the last glimmers of dusk. The acrid scent of smoke hung in the air. She spotted flickers of firelight in the distance. Her footsteps echoed through the empty streets. She passed overturned dumpsters and broken glass. The deeper she ventured, the more her stomach twisted in apprehension. Finally, the faint sound of chanting drifted through the cavernous buildings. Heart pounding, she followed the noise to the old train yard. There, in a clearing near abandoned tracks, a circle of quarantined individuals stood around a towering bonfire. Their expressions were at once entranced and devoid of light. Dr. Porter spotted Philip among them, standing near the blaze. His eyes glimmered with a strange, haunted intensity. They were all chanting something in low voices, indistinct syllables that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She noticed the same peculiar symbols scrawled on the ground, forming a massive spiral. The chanting grew louder. Then, as though some invisible signal had been given, a figure wearing a dark hood stepped forward. Someone who seemed to maintain a shred of consciousness or leadership. The figure held a can of paint and scrawled markings on a piece of plywood. It looked like a twisted version of the serpent's tail, elongated into a labyrinthine design. Dr. Porter crept closer, pressing herself behind a rusted freight container. Her heart hammered in her ears. She fumbled for a small camera in her pocket, snapping a few pictures to document the bizarre ritual. A second wave of chanting followed, and then horrifyingly, a captive man was dragged into the center of the circle. He was screaming, thrashing, desperation in his voice. Dr. Porter recognized him, one of the volunteer guards from earlier night. The chanting rose to a fever pitch, drowning out his pleas. The hooded figure raised a jagged piece of metal. Dr. Porter went cold with dread, certain she was about to witness a sacrifice. Without a second thought, she bolted from her hiding spot, yelling, "Stop!" All heads turned in her direction. Her voice echoed among the train cars. For a moment, everything froze. Then the hooded figure let out a guttural cry, and the crowd surged toward her. She turned and ran. Panic pounded in her veins. She heard their ragged footfalls scattering over gravel, their howls bouncing off the metal walls. She realized with a sickening lurch that it would be impossible to outrun them all. The first person to lunge at her was a wiry man who snarled like a wild animal. She dodged, stumbling over a broken rail tie. Two more advanced from the other side. In desperation, she pulled out a syringe of the revised serum, brandishing it as a weapon. "Stay back!" she yelled, her voice trembling. A fleeting sense of coherence crossed Philip's face. He stood a few paces behind the approaching throng. "Lillian?" he called, but his expression flickered as if warring with some internal demon. Before she could respond, the hooded figure pulled him aside, hissing words too low for her to hear. Philip's eyes rolled back, and he joined the crowd again, his posture once more vacant, desperate. Dr. Porter wrenched free from the nearest attacker and darted around a rusted locomotive, trying to circle back to them. If she could get just close enough to administer the gentle serum, maybe it would snap them out of this trance. A stone flew out of nowhere and struck her shoulder, nearly knocking her off balance. She bit back a cry, pressing forward. Shadows converged as the chanting began anew. She glimpsed the terrified guard lying on the ground, pinned by two infected individuals. His screams shattered the night. Something primal surged through Dr. Porter. She rushed to his side, injecting one of his captors with the serum in a swift, desperate motion. The man collapsed to his knees, groaning. Immediately, the aggression in his eyes lessened. He blinked as if seeing the world for the first time. However, the second captor turned on Dr. Porter, hissing, and raised a metal pipe. She braced for impact. Philippe suddenly stepped in front of her with surprising swiftness, grabbing the pipe mid-swing. A moment of lucidity flashed in his face. She saw him wrestle internally, torn between brutal impulse and recognition of his sister. He shoved the captor aside, then stood trembling. "Get them out of here," he gasped to Dr. Porter, nodding at the guard. Gathering her courage, she helped the guard hobble away while the circle dissolved into chaos. The hooded figure bellowed in fury, shouting commands. The crowd advanced again, howling. Smoke billowed from the bonfire. With adrenaline fueling her every step, Dr. Porter guided the injured guard along the perimeter of the train yard, ducking behind freight containers. The chanting behind them swelled, though some of the infected broke away in pursuit. She realized the only path was to circle all the way around and return to the fence. Gasping for breath, she used the shadows for cover. The battered guard moaned in pain, a dark stain spreading across his uniform. She steeled herself, refusing to leave him behind. Step by step, they made their way out, while screams and chanting echoed off the silent train cars. They finally emerged onto the main street. Official jeeps and trucks rumbled in from a distance. Blinding searchlights illuminated the industrial district. Dr. Porter shielded her eyes. Over a loudspeaker, an authoritative voice commanded, "All infected, remain where you are. This zone is under military control." An onslaught of gunfire ripped through the air. Dr. Porter gasped, ducking down behind a pile of rubble as the guard collapsed in exhaustion next to her. Through the dust and confusion, she caught sight of Reich himself stepping onto the terrain, flanked by soldiers. They were firing at anything that moved. Anguished cries pierced the night. She couldn't watch. Heart pounding in her throat, she scooped up the guard and made a desperate dash for the nearest alley. She glanced back, unable to see if Philip was still alive in that chaos, or if he had taken refuge somewhere in the swirling darkness. Just before ducking behind a half-demolished warehouse, she glimpsed columns of smoke, and the hooded figure collapsing under a hail of bullets, arms still raised to the now bloodied sky. A swirl of acrid fumes and despair choked her senses. In the hours that followed, the military secured the train yard with ruthless efficiency. By dawn, the area was littered with bodies, both infected and otherwise. Few survivors were taken for processing, a euphemism that made Dr. Porter's stomach turn. She managed to slip away into the labyrinth of city streets with the injured guard. Sobbing uncontrollably for all she had seen, she scrambled to find a safe place for them. The city's official news bulletins attributed the massacre to an extremist cult forming among the infected, providing politically convenient justification for the bloodshed. That morning, Dr. Porter sat in a derelict clinic, the guard resting fitfully on a cot. With trembling hands, she checked him for vital signs and administered what antibiotics she had. The overhead light flickered, half burned out. Eventually, he slipped into uneasy sleep. Outside, the city's daily routine resumed in a dazed hush. People peered out their windows, weighed down by rumors of the previous night. In the corners of her mind, Dr. Porter wondered if she would ever see Philip again. She still possessed a handful of syringes of her refined serum. Whatever the council planned to do, she refused to let her life's work become another weapon. Instead, she vowed to use it in small pockets of the city, among those who genuinely wanted to remember and break the cycle. She understood now that the plague was more than a disease. It was a profound moral crisis that preyed on denied guilt and fear. For those who were willing to face what they'd done at night, the serum offered a painful but necessary path toward redemption. Over the following days, Dr. Porter stayed underground. She moved from safe house to safe house, connecting with small groups who opposed the council's draconian measures. Word spread that she had a therapy that could help the plague's victims reclaim their minds without total psychological collapse. Each time she administered the serum, she guarded her patients from the savage resurgence of buried memories. Many sobbed uncontrollably. Some wandered in a daze. A handful lashed out in confusion, but a few, shaken though they were, slowly regained enough sense of self to resist the thrall of violent impulses at night. Outside, the city teetered on the edge of deeper ruin. The council weighed launching a citywide vaccination, a euphemism for forcibly injecting all infected with a brutal strain of the memory serum. Whispers circulated that the council was more interested in creating a docile populace than in mutual healing. Guards patrolled day and night, while rumors of black ops raids on suspected plague hideouts multiplied. A cold tension gripped everyone's hearts. No one could say how long the city could sustain the cycles of each new night, but Dr. Porter persisted, because she believed that if enough individuals could face their darkest secrets, perhaps they could share what they remembered. Perhaps, by acknowledging the monstrous acts hidden under the cover of darkness, the city could avert total collapse. Despite the unending despair, she clung to a faint glimmer of hope that memory could become the antidote, not an enemy. That confronting evil head-on was the only way out. To this day, no one is sure who truly instigated the savage rituals that pulsed through the quarantine zones. Conspiracy theories point to cult leaders or to manipulative council members engineering chaos for a power grab. Scattered sightings of the spiral symbols and serpent's tail designs still surface, scrawled in alleyways or hidden inside condemned buildings. Some say the city has forever changed, that once you've committed monstrosities, no matter how thoroughly you forget, you carry an echo of them in your soul. Yet, Dr. Porter continues her clandestine mission, guided by the belief that accountability is the only genuine cure for the plague of violence. She carries her revised serum in a worn black case, injecting the willing, coaxing their submerged memories into the light. To them, she whispers words of solace. Look at what you've done. Remember who you were. Only by facing the nightmare can we find our way back. Each night, the city's skyline is a jagged silhouette, and distant screams resonate in the darkness. But each dawn, there are small victories as more people wake, holding shattered fragments of the horrors they've committed, tears of remorse staining their cheeks. In those tears lies the seed of redemption, fragile yet real, for the path of healing must begin with the recollection of truth, even the ugliest truths. In a city draped in perpetual dread, that small step toward confession and understanding might be the last line between humanity and complete surrender to the nameless night. And so Dr. Porter continues, a single tireless soul, fending off the oblivion that would swallow them all if allowed. She refuses to let the world forget.